Tales from the streets.
All right, Mo, today we have Chief Lowe from Bangor Fire with us, and I am excited. I worked with Bangor Fire heavily in my Secret Service career. I won't get into that. I thought about it, but I will not do that. But we spent probably during the campaign 6 to 8 weeks working with those guys, tying up all their resources and law enforcement resources. And we were chatting a little bit beforehand. And Mo, back me if you want. We always kind of professionally, cops and firemen, we always kind of bust each other's balls a little bit. But every cop I've ever known has secretly been like, damn it, I should have been a fireman.
100%.
100%.
100%.
Every time,
'Cause we're
every
like,
time.
These guys, while we're out here, they're asleep. What are we doing?
Working out, eating good food. And then,
Always.
everybody's happy to see the firemen show up because they're like, oh, thank God they're here.
Always. But then
100%.
we would trash talk them. So, but it's kind of like
Well,
a
we have
brother
to.
sister thing.
Exactly.
That's a good plug for us, though. Anyway, I appreciate that.
100%. No, we loved it. But when you need them, you're like a fire or some shit's going on or a medical thing. Like, I don't know. I got a gun with bullets. I don't know what to, I can't, nothing I could do with it. So anyway,
That's
Chief,
what I was going to
sorry,
say.
little bit of a
when
bunny
stuff
trail.
caught on fire, I ain't want none of
Yeah.
that. I'd be like, you guys need me just to watch these hoses, right? I got it. I'm going to do my part.
Exactly. Whatever you need. Chief, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. If it's okay, we'll just kind of jump right in. And
Sure.
we talked a little bit offline, but if you could just talk about kind of your upbringing and what even got you initially interested in being a first responder.
Yeah, absolutely. So, my grandfather was a police officer in Rockland, Maine. He spent a few years doing that. And then my father, when he came out of Vietnam, went to work also for, I think it was the town of Thomaston is where he started, or down on both communities down on the coast. And they were both in law enforcement. My grandfather for 12 or so years before he pursued a different career. And my father for, I want to say it was just about 20 or a little over 20 years. So I always had a level of awareness for public safety and community service, growing up through. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do as a kid. Being in public safety wasn't necessarily a lock for me. I know coming up through, I had kind of a difficult childhood. I was in a single parent home for a long time. We moved a lot, like a lot. And when you move a lot, it's hard to develop friendships. You don't get involved in sports. There was a point there where I was moving schools every year. So it takes a toll on you, trying to figure that out. So that combined with other things made it difficult for school and whatnot. And I was going down a bad path. I really was. And at some point I moved in with my father up in the town of South Paris, Maine, which is western Maine over towards the New Hampshire border. And there was a family friend that was in the fire department. He was an assistant chief in the department there. And he said, this was when I was 15. He said, when you turn 16 in another month or so, you'll be eligible to come on down to the fire department. Why don't you come down and check it out and see what it's all about? Because I really didn't have anything else going on.
Yeah.
And I thought that would be great, So I went down and fell in love with it. At 16 years old, I was like, this is what I want to do. It was a lot of the connection that I was missing. It was some stability, if you will. There was structure. It's a fire department. There's structure to it. Those types of things, and that's really what got me involved in the fire service as a junior firefighter.
Can I ask what you were doing at 16? That's a great idea, but what were you doing at 16? That's amazing.
Pretty much nothing.
But you were there.
Honestly,
Okay.
I was, I had a girlfriend and I was going to school.
Okay.
I wasn't doing homework. I wasn't doing much in the way of chores. When I say it was a difficult upbringing, if you can envision a Vietnam War era dad who was raised by a World War II era dad, there's some conflict there because I was a teenage kid with no vision, no idea what he wanted to do. And so I went against the grain fairly heavily. So that's what I was doing. I did work. I had a part-time job here or there, whatever the case may be. But other than that, I really didn't do much. I was on a trajectory for nothing. And you know what that can lead to.
100%.
Yeah. So got in the fire department at 17, just before I turned 18. I took an EMT class. Was able to be an EMT once I turned 18. Played around. I joined the National Guard because I thought maybe I wanted to do the military a little bit. I actually dabbled in law enforcement a little bit.
Oh,
I was a reserve officer for the town of Oxford. I was also a reserve deputy for the Oxford County Sheriff's Office. And like we had mentioned before, even when people call you, they don't necessarily want you there. It was a hard lesson for me, I think, about people and where I wanted to be as far as helping people and stuff like that. And the opposite side of the coin for me was the fire service and EMS, which I was also dabbling in. And like you said, people are happy when you see them there. You can have an immediate impact. There typically isn't any violence going on that we're doing or anything like that, as far as taking people into custody or upsetting people, those types of things. So that's the route I followed. And in 1994, I started my career with the City of Auburn Fire Department, and I stayed there for 22 years before I moved on to other pastures.
so you really went all over the state of Maine. I lived in Maine, so I know the areas you're talking about. But that's okay. All right, Mo, go ahead. I saw
Yeah.
you had a
Just for the record, I did know Rockport. That I did know that place.
gorgeous Rockland. Yes, gorgeous.
That was where my timeshare was.
I lived in Gorham, Scarborough, Saco, South Portland, all over the place. We bounced everywhere. West Paris. Yeah, it was quite a ride for a long time.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I,
Go
I
ahead,
had a
Mo.
question. When you said at 16, they said come to the fire department and you can work there. Was that like you started being employed as a firefighter at 16?
So in Maine, you're allowed to be what's called a junior firefighter.
Okay.
And back in 1986, it was pretty loose. But really, you weren't supposed to do things that would immediately endanger you. So I wasn't allowed to take a hose line inside a building. I wasn't allowed to go up on the roof and cut holes or those types of things. But I could support on the fire ground with help moving hoses. The worst place you could probably put a kid is in the roadway. I could direct traffic, those types of things. So
Wow.
it was meant to be a training, mentoring type scenario to
I see.
get you familiar with it,
Yeah.
get you involved, and see if it was something you wanted to do. So that's what I jumped into.
That's super
I think it's
interesting.
a great idea.
We have what we have, like they don't call them junior officers, but we have like the where they'll come in high school, but they don't even go. They do ride-alongs now. They're just starting to getting them into ride-alongs, but I think they've got to be there for a while. But that's why when you said at 16, I wanted to know how much latitude you had to kind of get into the job and make that decision. It sounds like you had a lot.
I had a fair amount. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's more tightly controlled now, but I had a fair
Yeah.
amount. Yes.
I could imagine there's a lot more liability.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then 17, 18, you were EMT trained. Like, were you on the ambulances, like going to calls and?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I turned, so I
Wow.
was licensed 2 months after my birthday. The class ended. I was 18 and I was licensed, and I went on the trucks right away. And,
Wow.
for a lot of people, they'll tell you that they don't mind EMS or they like EMS, but they really like fire. I'm kind of the other way. I enjoy firefighting. I really do. And I enjoy that role. But I really like doing the EMS or the ambulance side of the house. I get to interact with people more. I can see how compassion and empathy can really affect them and the issues that they're having. I can deliver real-time treatments. And it's just, to me, it's more rewarding. And it's more, I like the cerebral aspect of it. I like using my brain and thinking through what some of the issues are. And boy, this is happening. And if I give this med, will it make it worse? Or can I do something with this medication? Or those types of things. So I really, really enjoy the EMS piece. And I think when I transition out of the fire service for my final hurrah, I will probably still stay active with emergency medical services in some fashion. I just don't know what that'll be yet.
Yeah, I'm blown you were doing this at like 18, 19 years old. Thinking back to my 18, 19 year old, there's no way in hell I would want to do that. Just because you're dealing with real life medical emergencies or whatever. I mean, that's why
Right.
you're there. And I don't know that I would have been the best empathetic vehicle at that age. I was not very empathetic at that time. But that all very, like, I'm just kind of unwrapping what you're talking about. So So around what age were you when you, I guess, started at Auburn, and then you ended up staying there for 22 years? That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
So
awesome.
I was 23 when I was hired at Auburn.
Okay.
I was hired in as a firefighter. That next year, I completed my paramedic program, and I stayed there. I had what I like to call my early midlife crisis. Back around 2000, I
Yeah.
moved to Florida for a year, and I worked for Collier County EMS.
Oh, okay.
And I spent a year down there, and there was some disagreements and some misunderstandings with my role and my salary when I got there, and some of the other things that were supposed to be happening that weren't happening. And I was there by myself. I didn't have any family.
Yeah.
I was slowly making friends, but as I alluded to before, that's can be a challenge for me. And there was a final upheaval that involved fire class. So in Florida, they don't accept certification from any other state. You have to go and take their whole program all over again. So I had started in their program, and there was an administrative hiccup with whether my class was going to be allowed to complete all of it, or if we were just going to get like a conditional certification. And I decided that was enough. I didn't want to do it anymore. And I came home. I spent 2 years working for a third service EMS system before I went back to work for the city of Auburn. And they brought me back. I promoted up through the ranks fairly quickly. Yeah. And I left there as the fire chief after 22 years.
Wow.
So, yeah.
What were the biggest differences between the way, I'm trying to say this correctly, the way things were done in Maine as opposed to Florida? Florida feels like the wild, wild west to me.
So it depends on which side of the house you look on. If you're on the fire side of the house, this is solely my perspective. I don't think it's the wild, wild west. I think it's very regimented. I think it's highly defined. I think that they have their standards, they're in place for a reason because they have so many people coming through and there's such a demand on the service down there. And it is really a high risk job that you need to make sure you have those minimum standards in place. So I think on the fire side, they have it very dialed in. On the EMS side, the control is local control or county control in a lot of places, whereas in Maine, it's one set of state protocols. And depending on which region you work in Florida will determine what you can do within your protocols. Some places are able to give blood, or they're able to give plasma, or things similar to those treatments. And those are, for lack of a better way to put it, those are kind of cutting edge treatments right now in the EMS field. We've talked about it for a long time. For it to be making its way to the street and beyond ambulances and not helicopters or airplanes is really a big thing. And they're really showing benefits in treatment of things like sepsis, severe infection, and loss of blood and those types of things by providing those treatments. So I think not as controlled in Florida, but the control that is there is better structured because it's smaller and it allows the freedom to do more advanced things and explore things that you might not otherwise have.
Okay. Mo?
Interesting. No, I was shocked when you said you had come down to Collier County and that you would think that having an individual that had some level of experience coming into a service type industry where I don't know if fire struggles as much, but I know on the police side, we struggle sometimes with getting people hired on. When we get someone that already has some level of experience, we are going to try to make sure we take care of them. And for us, we also have like an accelerated program. We don't recognize outside certificates, but they can do a equivalency of training that they can go through, which is like a 2-week course, crash course, and then they take the state exam. And if they can pass it, they're able to come out and be a law enforcement officer. So I'm surprised they don't have the equivalent for fire.
Yeah.
So EMS was easy. Collier County snapped me right up quick for my paramedic certificate. I had to go and take the Florida State exam, which I passed. It wasn't any different than any other exam.
Right.
And they snapped me up really quick for that. And there's no doubt about it, they were a progressive, very forward-thinking service. And they were great. In general, they were great. I liked working there. It was just those, the added stress of assimilation and not having any support there.
Yeah.
I think kind of wore me down after a while. So
Sure.
I really don't have much bad to say about them at all.
No,
Other
I
than
get
those
it
few
though.
hiccups. Yeah.
I'm tracking. So we'll go back to Auburn, and just a quick run through, because I understand you progressed up to fire chief. What was that process like for you? Because I am interested in getting into some of the other stuff we talked about, mental health and
Sure.
the recruiting, but just kind of what was that process for you?
Yeah, so I've always been kind of self-motivated. I went and took a lot of classes, took certification classes for fire officer and instructor certification and those types of things. And those really are some of the foundational programs you need if you're going to promote up through the ranks in the fire service, or they're at least recommended. I was back a few years, I don't remember how many years exactly, before I made a lieutenant, which is the first line supervisor, which might be a corporal or a sergeant in a lot of police forces. I don't think I was a lieutenant 8 months. I think it might have been 6 months before I had an opportunity to promote up to captain. I promoted up to captain fairly quickly. It was in 10. We had a pretty significant administrative shakeup in the fire department. The chief retired. There was a deputy chief that was there. There was a lot of issues surrounding the deputy chief. And some administration came to the office one day and said, "Hey, we saw you put in for the fire chief's position. Would you like to serve as acting chief for a while?" And I put in as to be the fire chief more for experience than anything. I didn't really want to ever be fire chief in that department because, it's hard in a smaller department like that where people have preconceived thoughts and notions and baggage follows you and stuff. And
Yeah.
you don't really have an opportunity to reset. So I never really wanted to be a chief in a department like that. But I'm also not one to pass on opportunity when it comes knocking. So, I said, yeah. So in 2010, I started as the acting chief for the city of Auburn Fire Department. I was a captain, and a couple months later, the city manager and I had a conversation, and he decided to promote me to deputy chief if I wanted the spot, because we were getting ready to go public safety model, where the
Okay.
police chief would run both fire and law enforcement.
Oh,
And
I didn't know that.
yeah, yeah. So in some places it works, like Broward County, Florida is a place that it works. In a small place like in a small New England city, it does not work that well. And we found that out fairly quickly. It was it was good intended. There was a lot of thought that went into it. There was a lot of money into exploring it. And what wasn't counted was the people side. So I served as a chief in one form or another up until 2016 when they made me the full chief. And I'll tell you that the time that I spent as a chief officer from 2010 to the time I left was probably the worst work experience I've ever had in my life. Hands
Why
down,
is that?
question. We had a very, very toxic city council nearly all that time. In that, what is that? That's 8 years. In
Yeah.
that 8 years, I had 12 different bosses.
Holy moly.
It was absolute pandemonium. It was difficult to get anything through as far as making changes. There was a lot of issues involving the city and the city managers and the councils. At one point, they looked at privatizing the fire department, doing away with us altogether, and bringing in rural metro as a third agency. So I'm thankful that I went through it because I learned so much more than I would ever learn in any other environment. And I've carried a lot of those lessons forward,
Yeah.
especially with the politics and learning how not to overreact and understand when people are venting and those types of things. But yeah, it was brutal, just absolutely brutal on me mentally, and it took a toll on me physically, which is really what kind of when I left Auburn, I was looking to leave Auburn, knowing that I had 3 years left before I could retire, but I had reached my endpoint. I couldn't be there anymore.
Go ahead, Mo. Sorry.
I've often wondered with the public safety model, you said there was some thought that went into the whys, and it never to me seems like you said, the setup is usually the police chief or the sheriff or whoever will be in charge of everything. And I don't know many people who are cross-trained that are law enforcement officers in fire safety and those kind of things. How on earth does that, when you're doing that, thinking about it in the background, how do we come around to saying that that's the best model? It doesn't strike me as being the best model because of my, if I was a sheriff, I have a lack of experience on the entire side of the other house that I'm in charge of.
Right. So I think there's a couple things with that. I think the first thing is if you're looking at it from a purely administrative function. Policy is policy, and discipline is discipline, and budgets are budgets. And if you're not involved intimately with the operation and you think that you can maintain or you think you can manage at that level, then it works. I would say, I'll go back to Broward as the example. There's the sheriff who is a political appointment, and that person is responsible for the politics and some of the policy implementation and those things. You think about how many layers of operational supervision there is below that person that handles all of that operation stuff. That's why I think it can work in that environment. The sheriff, I think, in that environment is almost an assistant city manager, if you will, so that they get feedback from the operations folks and can make informed decisions at the higher level. In a smaller department like Auburn, it didn't work because there was a misunderstanding. The fire service, so I'll let you in on a dirty secret. After I left Auburn, I went to Orono and I served as a public safety director in Orono for a couple years as a fire guy doing it. I knew the limitations that I didn't know police operations, and I didn't put my nose in that because I trusted the person that was giving me information, the deputy police chief. If you're able to fill that role and assume that duty and know specifically what the guardrails are, then you can do it. The problem is that as managers, especially when you're tasked by your boss to take on a new role, you want to do good at it, right? And you want to show you're involved, and you want to show that you're hands-on. And you hit it, Mo, where law enforcement doesn't have that connection, so they come in and they try to apply theory or practice they use with their patrol folks or their investigators or whatever. That does not communicate over to the fire side at all. As a matter of fact, our culture is such that we would rebel against a lot of that stuff. And that's kind of what happened. The deputy police chief there, or the police chief in Auburn who took over for us, was a great guy, super intelligent, very people focused. But about 6 months into the process, he and I sat with the city manager and he said, I'm done. It was no more. This cannot happen anymore. I don't understand the needs over there. It's difficult for me to manage the culture because it's so different. That it was already an established culture that he had to try to assimilate to him instead of him trying to assimilate to them. Now, that doesn't work. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's why I think the belief that it's solely policy focused and that the manager can come in and just manage or lead are the two things that make people think it can be done. And it really, in some places it works because it's been a long time, but the track to get there has been extremely painful. Yeah. And there's been a lot of good people lost along the way to get into those systems where it actually comes together and works.
Yeah, I would venture to say even in the large scale, like Broward counties, there's probably been casualties of that kind of machine coming in because you're bound to. I mean, whether you put a fire person in charge or a police person in charge, you have an entire, like I said, side of the house that you have no real way of connecting with. And the one thing you said, the people side of it, I don't know how you ever truly bridge that gap at all.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me ask you, kind of going back and forth a little bit. So through the ranks as you're going up and you're taking on more leadership roles, was there any type of leadership either structured courses that you took or stuff on your own, or how did you develop your leadership model?
Yeah, so I took what's called Fire Officer 1 and 2, which is a program, the highest program you could get here in Maine. And I had some other, I took a few online classes and those types of things. And I thought that I was ready to step into a chief's role and I would understand it. And come to find out, I was so underprepared and undergunned for what I was coming into. The pedigree is great, but if you don't have the experience, and I had some experience, but I didn't have the level of experience that I needed, and you either don't have the innate ability to be a leader, or you don't have somebody helping you along and coaching you. And even those innate leaders need a little bit of that coaching. So I floundered a lot trying to figure it out. And I went and talked to a few people and those types of things. I'll tell you what really broke things open for me in terms of leadership and got me into understanding the psychology of leadership, teaching leadership, making that the focus of my continuing studies was the executive officer program at the National Fire Academy
Oh.
in Emmitsburg, Maryland. The executive fire officer program really opened my eyes to a lot of deficiencies that I had, a lot of misunderstandings that I had. It helped me reframe a lot of bias and paradigms that I was carrying around. And it was really, really influential in how I treat people today and how I lead today, and a lot of those things. I think if I hadn't gone to that program, I don't know that I would be where I'm at today. I really don't. It was a life and a career altering program for me to go to.
Now, was that self-driven? Like you heard about it and you
Yep.
did it yourself, or?
Yeah. I'm very often making bucket lists for myself. I'm a big believer in checklists and in those types of things. So when I first wanted to be a chief, I wrote a bucket list. Hey, this is what I need. I need my associate's degree. I need my fire officer certification, this, that, those types of things. And I went and got those and moved on and that type of stuff. And then as I looked further on and I wanted to be a chief officer somewhere, I went back and I looked at what was happening in other places. So I don't know if you've experienced this in law enforcement, but very often what happens on the West Coast eventually moves to the East Coast, and you see credentialing and those types of things as they start to roll in the West Coast and move over this way. They're coming. So all you have to do is look to what's happening over towards California and whatnot, and you can see what's going to be here in a few years. So a lot of places that I was looking at, places that I thought, hey, this would be a department that I'd like to go to, were starting to require things like the executive officer program. They were looking for things like master's degrees. They were looking for designation as a chief officer through the Center for Public Safety Excellence. And I said, well, this is where I need to go. These are the things that I need to do to move along. So it was self-motivated, but it was through research, looking to see what's coming, not necessarily looking in my immediate environment. Because if that's where you're looking, especially in this career field, you're going to miss things. You really need to be looking outside of what other places are doing and the bigger places are doing, because we always mirror the bigger places, what's happening there, so it's a trickle down thing. That's where I looked, and that's the path I followed. That's how I got the education and things that I thought I would need. I think that my formal education and my credentialing through the Center of Public Safety Excellence is what allowed me to get into the town of Orono, the place that I went to after Auburn. And that again was a whole nother, that was a great learning opportunity, but it was in a positive light as opposed to my time in Auburn.
Fair enough.
My chief's time in Auburn, I should say.
I understand. So you said you're finishing up your PhD. What is that in, and what are you hoping to accomplish with that?
Yeah, so actually, I'm going to be starting my PhD.
I'm sorry.
Apologize for that. No. I'll be starting in October. I'm starting a PhD in ethical leadership. And I really like the topic of leadership. It speaks to me on so many levels, because it really, if you're truly practicing leadership and you understand it, then you're really getting down into the psychology of it. You're getting down to the people piece. And I talked before about ethics and empathy and those types of things. And come to find out, regardless of my upbringing and the challenges and things like that I really kind of thrive in that level, and trying to get people to where they need to be and helping them along. And really that's what leadership is all about. And I want to enhance my knowledge on that. And my goal is to take that and to teach, and if I can get into consulting or coaching, those types of things, I would love to do that. To me, that's worthwhile work. This is where I can give back. And there's a huge lack of that type of education or information out there for leaders all across the board, especially in public safety, whether it's law enforcement or fire service or even EMS, because we tend to run in our own circles and we tend to want to get information from our own circles.
Mm-hmm.
And if you go back to what I said before, we don't always look outside. So if you're not looking outside of what's happening, and you're not getting that education, or you're not seeing what other people are doing, I should say, then you're not going to be able to bring that in and make effective changes in your own organization. And I think that a long-term fire service member in the state of Maine, and a fire chief, and somebody who teaches it. So I teach now at the National Fire Academy. I teach a leadership course there and among a couple other courses. And I think all of that combined, if I can bring that back and help the newer people that are coming in the mid-level officers that want to be chief officers someday, and start laying some of this foundation and spew some of this out to them, and hopefully they absorb at least part of it, it'll make their road easier. So that's really what I hope to do with it.
Yeah, you're touching on something that I have thought about for a long time and have experienced over the course of my career, is the joining of experience with formal training. I've experienced both, where somebody has all the experience in the world, but they didn't do the formal training, and it doesn't make them, I'm not saying anything negative about them. I do, however, struggle with people whose entire career has been in the education side, trying to teach me now how to do the job that they have never done, that I have kind of pushed back against, sometimes articulately and I professionally, sometimes not so, because I'm like, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about. But my point being, when you can combine both, in my opinion, it makes for a better product for what you're talking about.
Yeah. So, for a long time, there was a big push for people to have associate's degrees before they came in the fire department. Now, some people require bachelor's degrees. For an entry-level position, this is what I put to my folks is, I don't care if you have that for an entry-level job. I want you to come in, learn the skills, get the foundation. And then as you move on and get ready to promote up, that's when I start that higher education piece. And honestly, the higher education is great, but what it teaches you more, I think, is it teaches that prolonged reward piece, meaning you have to work for something to get that reward, which we don't necessarily get in this instant gratification society. Yeah. So if you want to promote up, do your associate's degree, and at some point I'll promote you to lieutenant or captain, show you have that commitment. The other thing that it does, which was huge for me because I lacked it and I didn't realize I lacked it, as bad as I did anyway, is it really builds critical thinking. And I'm not one just to go to school to get a piece of paper, but once I started my formal education and I started doing research and I started building critical thinking, and I could apply what I was doing on the street, those core skills that I learned, I could synthesize them and be able to communicate back why we are doing them and look at different ways to doing them based on whatever it was I pulled, because I had experience looking things up and researching and thinking about things. It made my life a lot easier, and it made getting buy-in a lot easier. So I'm not big on pedigrees coming in the door, but I do think you need them to some degree. And I don't know what that high end is, but I think you need them to some degree as you progress through an organization.
No, for sure. Well, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, I agree. And I think it's, for someone that you said when you were in high school that school wasn't your thing, and it wasn't, you weren't into it. It's good to see the evolution that I think needs to take place. Like you said, you get into this career, and this originally, like as in law enforcement, I think most service careers, it's a lot of the hands-on, that kind of thing. And then there comes a point where you age out and you say, I want to make the agency better for the next group that is coming through. And the only way that we can do that is through education. As I'm a trainer, I don't have a PhD or going for a PhD like you, but I think that was the drive, similar to what you're saying, is to make sure that we can teach that critical thinking piece. Because like law enforcement with fire, you can't give your guys a checklist and say, as long as you check down this list, you'll be fine on a fire. They've got to be able to think through the call and make those decisions based on what's opening and unfolding in front of them.
Right. Yeah, a lot of people are shocked when I tell them that I'm a high school dropout. I did not like school so much and got in so much trouble with not liking school that I dropped out of school. I like to call it the delayed graduation program, because I went back through and did a year of adult education to complete my high school degree. And, part of that is, and I just recently learned this, people in public safety, especially law enforcement and fire, have a certain degree of ADHD. It's just the way it is.
Yeah.
That enables, our executive function in our brain, which should tell us, don't run towards the person shooting a firearm, or don't run into that building, it's on fire, doesn't necessarily work right. And that's what enables us to get there. So what happens is, when we're in school, we're not interested in those topics. I don't care about, some of the things that we had to learn, the Taft-Hardy Act or whatever. I just don't care.
Uh-huh.
because I couldn't relate it to anything that I was doing that's tangible.
Right.
But once I got out of that environment and I could see how education, even though I was a horrible high school student, I was, I rocked, my college classes because I could see how it all connected. And I could even get into art history to a degree because I could make a connection. And it's where I was able to make that connection. I was able to get past my ADHD, if you will, and make that connection, which created a success. So people who feel like they're not smart or they barely passed in high school, that is in no way an indicator of what your success is going to be when you get into, adult education programs and stuff like that. If you enjoy it and you can connect it to things in your life that you enjoy, then you'll likely be successful at it. You just need to be brave enough to take the leap and do it. That's where a lot of it lies, is in, are you courageous enough to put yourself out there and take that risk?
100%.
I have nothing to add to that. You're speaking my language. I say the same things to people all the time because I was a terrible high school student, and I went to college, and all of a sudden it kind of clicked because I cared about what I was doing. So I 100% agree with what you're saying. I do want to I want to jump back because this is one of the parts, and if I'm boring you, and I apologize, but and it's not meant to bash or anything, but I am fascinated with the idea, especially in a municipality where you are running a department and you're having to deal with people who are not firefighters, they're not cops, whatever, and you're having to articulate to them, hey, we need money because of this, and they're like, no, I don't think so, or whatever. What was that? It doesn't have to be specific, but what were those interactions like for you? Well, we'll stick with Auburn for now. What was that like for you? Because that was the first time you ever had to deal with it, correct?
Yeah, so I was the deputy fire chief working for the police chief in Auburn, right?
Yes.
So I can't be a good judge of what that was because the relationship between municipal leadership and the fire department was so toxic. They didn't want to give us money for anything.
Yeah.
They refused to understand the budget. They refused to sit and talk about why overtime expenses were what they were. So I couldn't be a real good judge. I know my boss, the police chief at the time, was very receptive to things that I came to him with. And
Yeah.
I explained to him, I came in and said, hey, we need a study of the fire department. There's so much criticism. Let's bring in an independent third party to evaluate us and look at what's happening here. And as it turned out, the evaluation validated everything we were saying on the fire side. So obviously that wasn't well received.
Yeah.
We needed apparatus, we needed different things. And he was always receptive to it and would bring items forward. But it was so volatile and so anti-fire on any level that it was very difficult to do. When I left, this is how bad it got for me. When I left, I just started doing things on my own. I stopped asking for permission with some stuff because I knew what needed to be done. Every time I tried to do something, I would run up against a door. For instance, you guys are familiar with records management systems. You guys do law enforcement. They're a critical piece
Yep.
of the organization. We needed one. So law enforcement, without a doubt, you have to have a records management system for tracking education and evidence and all those other things. We need one in the fire service to track training and equipment and inspections. We could not get them to understand that we needed one because for all those reasons. And their answer was, well, we're going to get you set up with this one that Public Works is doing, or we're going to get you set up with this one that the library is using, those types of things. And they're all specific.
What?
They're specific to the job you do.
Yeah.
So towards the end, it was little things like that. Like, all right, you don't want to give me, at the time, it was like 15 grand to purchase in the first year of a records management system for a fire
Yeah.
department. I'm like, you
That's
don't want to give me
crazy.
the money for that? I'm just going to go spend it. That's what I'm going to do. And it's
Good.
that I was in that type of mindset. So when I
Yeah.
say I was ready to leave and looking for an out, it was almost like I was looking for an out because I knew I was going to get in trouble. And
Yeah.
I didn't want to get in trouble before I left. So I was
Understood.
kind of rolling the dice, but at the same time, I was just over it. I wanted to
Yeah.
do things that made sense and were good for the organization and would help whoever's going to come in behind me do better.
Yeah.
So that's where I was at.
Okay, so I'm mind blown about this. When we're talking about public safety that incorporates law enforcement and fire and things like that,
Mhm.
there are bare bones minimum things that you need for operating.
Yep.
To me, a records management system is built into the operating cost of a public safety, whether you're talking about fire or law enforcement, that's built into the bare bones. This is a must have. So when you say that obviously it was a very volatile, why was there this volatility or this constant pushback on the fire side? Was it because it was run by police or what? Because it sounds to me like it was outside of the police seem to be kind of on board with wanting you. So I'm just a little, because this just seems to me like that's like, hey, we need guns for law enforcement. Now you're
Right.
fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So the volatility came from the elected officials, the city councilors. It came from community activists that were opposed to spending money. And it came from the appointed officials like the city manager because they did what was required of them by the council. So the fire department was seen as basically a money suck. There was no really tangible value there. The statements were made that they could replace us with volunteers. Like I said, they wanted to bring a a well-known private company in to replace us and just contract with them to provide service, all of those things. Those are all things that I was battling either by myself once we broke from public safety, because I went for a long time as the only person being in a chief's role. I had no deputy chief. Um, it was just me doing a lot of this because they didn't want to invest money. For
Right.
several years, I didn't have a vehicle. I had to use my own vehicle to go to meetings or to respond to calls or those types of things. Just absolute silliness based on
Yeah.
nothing other than we want to spend money. The fire department got the brunt of it. The city wasn't safe. The fire department got the brunt of it. But during budget time, they would come up with these crazy ideas like, hey, let's cut $1.5 million out of the budget with no real idea what that means or what that
Yep.
saves. So when you cut $1 million out of a budget or $1.5 million, you're hitting multiple departments for a lot
Yeah.
of money.
Yeah.
And on the other side of the coin, when you cut $1 million out of a budget, for most properties in Auburn, you are saving them like $2.60 a year on their tax bill.
It's
That's
nothing.
not that's not per thousand. That's the total tax bill, like $2.60. Also, they could say, hey, we cut $1 million out of the budget.
It's
So yeah, that's
ridiculous.
great. You saved a lot of money, but that $2.60 has now taken most of your office staff out of your clerk's office. So you can't get cars registered as fast, or now we're shutting down a fire engine, or now your roads aren't being plowed as quickly because those types of things.
So
Again,
yeah.
I'm sorry, Tyler.
No,
This
go
is
ahead, Mo.
just
Go.
it's I'm laughing at times because this is just crazy when you're like, we can replace you and bring in volunteers.
Yep.
Somebody who does a job that's not getting paid is never going to do it at the level of somebody who is getting paid. And it's at the end of the day, and I don't mean to sound flippant, but it's all fun and games until your house burns down because you're waiting on somebody who's a volunteer to get there. So
Right.
that blows my mind. But then I have a question to piggyback on this. When you kept indicating that they had talked about privatizing fire. On the law enforcement side, we've seen where they'll privatize the jail. They've never privatized law enforcement that I'm aware of, but like they'll privatize the jail systems. And I have seen most of those are awful. The conditions are terrible. It is a situation where when law enforcement officers are bringing people in, people are escaping, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There's just corruption because the uppers are getting kickbacks for bringing in certain vendors. There's just problem after problem after problem. I never even, the concept of private fire, I had never even heard of until you said it like 5 minutes ago. So what does that even look like?
So, like the jails or any business, I mean, the motivator there is revenue. That's what they're in business to do, is make revenue. Whereas in municipal service or government service, you're trying to provide a service. That's the income. Is, are you providing service that meets the needs of the community or the goals of the community, what have you? So yes, privatization of fire service is a thing, and I won't mention the names of any of the bigger companies that
Oh,
do
it's
it.
okay.
You
Yeah.
can certainly do your studies, but if you go back and look at the relationships they've had with communities or whatever the case may be, you'll see that that profit is the motivator, and if their margins are narrowing, then they're going to cut services. And the answer to that is, well, we can still provide service because we're going to be covering from here, or we're going to be covering from there, or whatever the case may be. But it's all revenue is what they're looking at doing. Just like private EMS, it's all revenue. So a big thing in 911 delivery now with private services or hospital-based services providing ambulance service is the transfers that they do are taking precedence in a lot of systems because those are the larger revenue generators. You get more money for running a transfer from a hospital to another hospital or whatever it may be than you get for a 911 response.
Yeah.
Not only that, if you're running transfers, you reduce the dead time that those trucks aren't running calls. So 911 calls take a back seat to, or they go in the queue just like any other call. So if there are 3 transfers and 911 call is the 4th call that comes in, the 3 transfers are going to go first, and whatever's left will take the 911 call. That's how a lot of systems are functioning nowadays. It's because of the revenue piece, and there have been studies and there's research out there now that supposedly suggests that maybe most of the 911 medical calls that we go on aren't really truly emergencies. So do you really need to send an ambulance emergent? Probably not. That's why it's okay for us to queue them. That's what some of the things are suggesting out there. And that's what's driving some of the behaviors you're seeing of the privates.
That's just wild to me.
I appreciate you touching on this because I don't think a lot of people know this. I know what you're referring to, having dealt with rural areas and learning the difference. I'm also just kind of taken aback because usually on law enforcement, we're always bitching because they always want to cut law enforcement's budget, and we're driving cars that are 20 years old and have holes in the floor or whatever, and they're telling us, watch our gas or whatever. Anyway, I didn't realize it could happen to fire because typically, again, from my perspective, everybody loves the fire trucks, they love the firemen, but it's shocking to hear that. I guess you guys suffer sometimes the same wrath when it comes to budget time. Just because I want to get to a couple other things, but so then you transition into Orno.
Mm-hmm.
You said you had a lot of things that what was some of the bigger takeaways from that time in Orno, leaving Auburn, and now you're running two agent fire and law enforcement. What were some of the takeaways?
Yeah, so I started just on the fire side, and basically everything that I saw in Auburn that I rebelled against or traumatized me, if you will, for lack of a better word, I did the opposite in Orno, and it was incredibly effective. I took the lessons that I learned through the National Fire Academy. I took a lot of the stuff that I had gained through reading and those types of things, and I really used Orno as a learning lab, if you will, to not do the negative things and to get people involved and to fine tune how I talk to people and how I look at applying influence and that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think I was anyway, super successful there. We were able to grow the organization and staffing, and we were able to get whatever we needed for equipment. People were happy there. There was a lot of enjoyment. There was a lot of job satisfaction. We're doing a lot of different things. And I think, they, meaning the firefighters, did most of the work. Yeah. I did most of the facilitation and the advocacy and the politicking to get them what they needed. A lot of times what people need is they just need to hear yes or give it a shot and let's see what happens. And that's really what was missing is we'll go back to that piece about having the courage to try it and see what happens. We're worried about money. Well, don't worry about it. If it gets too expensive, I'll let you know. Go and do and figure this out, Yeah. And if we have to tweak or adjust, then we'll tweak or adjust. I don't want you to think I blow the budget every time. That's not the point.
No, I understand.
But I'm also not a bean counter either. And I know that growth and getting better and doing things differently, there's a cost to that. So as long as we can calculate that and figure out what it's going to be, and if it's reasonable, then let's go do it. Or maybe we need to step back and approach it a different way or wait until the new budget or whatever the case would be. That's what was missing, really.
Got it.
Yeah, so it was great.
So then you transfer now to Bangor.
So before that, I'll tell you the police piece here.
Yeah, okay,
so,
there we go. I knew it was in there somewhere.
I was I did 4 years as the fire chief. 4 years, something like 3 years, maybe. I don't know. I don't remember what it was, but I did. The police chief left. The deputy chief, in the eyes of the town manager, wasn't quite ready to step up to be police chief.
This is in Orno?
This is in Orno. Yep.
Okay.
So she asked me if I would be willing to go in and provide administrative support
Okay.
for the police department while he was able to learn and coach and have conversations with me and those types of things. And that role almost evolved into like an assistant town manager role for me, where I was involved in a lot more than a public safety director might typically be involved in. So another great learning experience for me. Number one, I didn't get involved in patrol operations. Had no place being there. I didn't want to be there. All I wanted to know about is if somebody was being disciplined or there was an internal investigation going on or those types of things, that I'd be aware of it. I would ask for some involvement where it was appropriate. But other than that, I didn't get involved in police operations. And going back to, like we said before, I think that's the biggest thing, is knowing what your guardrails are.
Yeah.
I don't need to be involved with any of that stuff. So I focus primarily on some of the union related stuff, helping them with the higher level things that they might not otherwise be aware of or know how to handle. For example, we put together a community oriented policing statement. We're a university community. They were big on DEI initiatives, those types of things. There was a lot of scrutiny at the police department, not hyper scrutiny, but there was a lot of scrutiny. So one of the things we did to challenge that is that community-oriented policing statement, to say, this is how we do it, this is what we do, this is what you can expect, and if there's a problem, this is how you let us know so we can handle it. Those types of things I helped them with. Other than that, it was a great experience for me, learning about, police officers have different rights that you need to be aware of. There's different certification standards through the academy that you need to be aware of. If this happens, a police officer can be decertified, all those things. So it was a great learning opportunity. And it gave me a little diversity from what I was training people upstairs for and practicing upstairs in a completely different group.
Mm-hmm.
I think had I stayed, it would have been another year or so before I would have been, the deputy would have been able to take over. Like, he was doing really good. He had a tough group. It's a small town.
Yeah. College town.
Yeah. Law enforcement officers are law enforcement officers. You guys are a completely different breed. I'm glad that I'm not a police chief. You can say what you want to about the fire department, but I'm glad I'm not a police chief. But yeah, it was a great learning experience, and I don't think it went bad. I got a lot of support and a lot of thanks for what I did the time I was there. So yeah.
No, that's awesome. Orno is like, it's way up in northern Maine, but not like, it's not necessarily like Calais or some of these really tippy top bars.
No.
But it's an interesting place because it is. Chief, help me out. It's kind of rural, but there's a lot of college kids, so it's kind of transient. But
Yep.
the businesses are geared towards college.
Yep.
Bars, restaurants.
A lot of bars, pizza places.
Yeah, it's interesting.
So the housing is all, you say transient, it really is kind of transient, because either people buy houses and they convert them into multi units where people could come in and stay for a couple of years, or families will buy a house and their kids will go there, and then they'll have other people rent, and then they sell them after 4 years or so. So very academically inclined community, I guess is the way I would put it. A lot of very smart people there. Definitely unique challenges that go with those types of people and their wants and their desires in the community. But again, I can't complain at all about my time in Orono. It was good to me, and I got a lot out of it. And the people I worked with there were great. They really were.
For sure. So then we because I want to get to a couple things, but so then we transfer to Bangor. What kind of prompted you to want to go there? Because that's Bangor. Correct me, is the biggest city in Maine, I think, or most populated.
Third biggest city.
What's one? Well, who's more populated than Bangor?
So it's Portland, Lewiston, and Bangor.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Yep.
Still very. It's larger than people think because it isn't. It's still northern Maine.
Yep.
It's still probably 3 hours to the border, but anyway, it's still northern Maine. What prompted you to want to go to Bangor?
So in between Bangor and Orono, I was working in Ellsworth. I went down and did a few months there,
You're
And
just throwing up and down.
I needed another job, you know. So I went down there and served as the deputy. I thought maybe I was ready to just step back for a while and take a breath.
Yeah.
And again, it was good work, but it wasn't hitting the things that I wanted to hit when I think about leadership and system development and those types of things. And Bangor came open, and I knew the deputy chief at Bangor Fire, and I called him up and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about putting in for this." I said, I don't want to step on your toes where I figure you're going to be an internal candidate. If you don't think it's a good idea, well, let me know. And he said, no, he goes, "You're right, I am going to put in, but I certainly would welcome you to put in for it as well."
That's awesome.
I did.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's how I got there is they are a system that hasn't had enough attention paid to it is how I will put it.
Okay.
And there's a lot of opportunity for internal growth and development. There's a lot of opportunity to improve relations on the outside, both politically and with our mutual aid partners. And it's a continuation, I think, of what I was doing in Orono with building that skill base and working with different, more critical problems than I had in Orono or Auburn. We have a real, and I hope you don't mind me expanding a little bit. I'm
No,
not
please.
Go ahead.
for it. We have our call volume in Bangor is ridiculous. We're on track right now to run 10,500 calls this year. And for a bigger city, you know, that's not a lot, but for a main city, that's a considerable amount.
Yeah.
And, you know, well over 9,000 of them, probably close to 9,800 of them will end up being, I shouldn't say that, probably close to 8,800 of them will be ambulance-based calls. And we're short on ambulances right now. We're working through that. So that adds stress to the system. It adds fatigue. And what we have found is we have a mental health crisis in the Bangor Fire Department. In the last 2 years,
I was going to
we've
touch on
had
that.
2 people commit suicide. And so that alone statistically is usually significant. So that's one of the biggest challenges that I'm tackling right now is dealing with that. And I knew mental health was an issue when I came here. I was in Bangor about 3 months when the second suicide happened. I'd never experienced anything like that in my career. So that was another thing I had to kind of work my way through with support from others and whatnot. But we've gone from, hey, this is an issue that we need to deal with, to this is an issue I need to deal with right now, and we cannot wait anymore. And it's just mental health is so multifaceted, and there are so many drivers to negative mental health that it's almost overwhelming, or it is overwhelming, especially if you're just coming into it and you don't really realize how impactful home life and sleep and diet and everything else are in relation to mental health. So
Yeah.
we're aggressively as we can. I mean, there's always a time component to it and stuff, but we are as aggressively as we can working through that process now and developing a system and starting to develop internal programs to deal with things as they come up.
I want to touch on those. So we were talking prior, and again, I feel remiss because we did a mental health series and it was mostly law enforcement focused. And talking with you, sir, completely like it opened my eyes. Like the fire side obviously has to, you guys are experiencing things that we as law enforcement don't, whether it's fighting fires or, again, EMS calls. People don't necessarily, if you're not in the world of first responders, it covers the gambit. I'm not going to get too graphic or gory, but there's a lot of stuff that you will see. And then typically as law enforcement, we're either there to secure the area. We might try to do a few things, but really we are waiting for fire, rescue, EMS, whatever it is, or however it's labeled, to come and take over. Cause it's like, we're kind of out of our element. And we can pour some quick clot or poke some holes or something, try to, keep them around. But you guys are actually dealing with them, transporting them, trying to keep these people alive, and a lot of folks die. But one of the things that prompted that kind of conversation is in Maine, I was actually with the Secret Service, and I was transporting vehicles, but I came across a truck and 2 young men were inside, and I was trying to get them out, and it slowly caught on fire. And then eventually the 2 young men, I watched them burned alive. Stuck with me because I was trying to get them out, and, I thought I failed. and talking, and then but fire shows up, they kind of take over and I leave, and they had to put the fire out. They had to deal with all the aftermath. And I never thought about it after. I only thought about what I had to deal with. We met up a week later for a brief, and come to find out, like, the engine block was in their lap. And it was all these details that came about after the fact. And I was very thankful for that. I'd never been through a debrief with fire like that. Thought it was very helpful. I'm just putting that out there. But talking to you, I'm like, wow, I've never even considered like what they must go through, because they're dealing with it. And I'm sad to hear what you just said, that you've had 2 suicides so rapidly. And I have fond memories working with Bangor Fire and PD, all of them, because we were there often. But with that being said, what kind of programs are you looking into, or how are implementing it? And then 2-part question: programs, are you getting pushback? Because in the law enforcement community, there's a vast stigma still with mental health, and like, people just don't want to talk about it. They don't want to go to therapy. They don't want to tell anybody because they feel like it'll hinder their career, or whatever the reason might be. There's a lot of reasons why people don't want to do it. Are you seeing that in the fire side?
Yeah. So the stigma is always there. It's always going to be there no matter what you do. I think, given our experience in the prevalence of mental health in the organization, or mental health concerns in the organization, we're more open to plans or programs or opportunities than other places might be. I can't say everybody's bought into everything. We're still early on, so there's going to be a lot of things that are going to come out that are going to challenge beliefs. They're probably going to challenge contract language, which is held sacred, and some other stuff. But a lot of that, I'm hoping to be able to deflect some of that challenge by just having open communication and talking about the benefits on the backside, and being as transparent as we can be going through the process. We're working with a third-party vendor right now who is very skilled in mental health. They have some public safety mental health practitioners that have worked public safety before and have transitioned over. So I do expect some pushback on some of the things, because it's going to break from the norm from what we've done in the past.
Can you talk about what those are? I'm very interested in this.
Yeah. So
I don't want to break confidence or anything, but
yeah, no. So some of the things, like, one of the things in the fire department, if you work under a contract and you have seniority means something. Yeah. So if I have a provider that has just worked a cardiac arrest call on a child, that's an incredibly traumatic event for the crew responding. Part of the program would be to give that provider on that ambulance, or those providers, an opportunity to come off for an hour or whatever it is, to decompress or debrief or whatever they need to, and move other people on to that ambulance to cover them. And we have the capacity to do that with our paramedic staffing and whatnot. While we would expect, and we think that there are, just about everybody in the organization would do that, we also know that there are some holdouts in the organization that wouldn't. Really, what we're going to have to do to legitimize the program and say this has to be done for everybody because it's important, is we're going to have to mandate that. So that is one of the things. You're pushing back against the culture, one which is, this is my spot, I picked it, I have seniority.
yeah.
2, and it's pushing back against that contract. So it's little nuanced things like that are going to come up that will be a challenge. When we're talking about programs, I'm looking at a holistic program, a beginning to end, where when people come into the organization, we sit them and their family members down and we say, look, these are some of the things that you're probably going to experience. These are some of the things that you might see, within reason, to not traumatize them already, the family members. And give some information to the family members about things that they should be watching for in their loved ones, so that as time progresses, then, they can pick up on things and can report things or encourage that type of stuff. As time goes on, the piece to that is we have peer support providers that we're going to be expanding. So if you and I are in a cruiser, for example, and I notice we're on our 3rd day tour, and you're just, the last 3 days you have just been horrible, something's going on or whatever. As a peer support provider, I know how to talk to you, or I know how to get you some support you need, or I can enable you to decompress and respond to you in a proper way. So expanding our peer support provider group so that if you're in the ambulance or you're in the fire engine or you're in the bunk room one day and you're talking, you can pick up on that stuff, that type of thing. The additional piece to that is there's two things with the third party vendor. One is every year members will have to go do a check-in with a provider. The provider will come to the station, they get to do a check-in. Now I don't care if you talk to this person or not, it doesn't matter to me. But I want you to have the ability to go and talk to this person if you want to. If you just want to go and talk about football, you want to do the Matt Damon thing from Good Will Hunting where all you do is stare at each other for an hour, I'm okay with that too. It doesn't matter to me. I just want you to have that available to you and to know it's there. The third thing we're looking at doing is putting embedded providers on the trucks. And when I say embedded providers, what I mean is every couple months or so, there'll be providers that will come down and jump on the ambulance, or they'll jump on the fire engine, or whatever the case may be, and they'll ride out with the crews just to see what the crews are seeing and to look for those little things. So two things. Number one, it's meant to build connectivity between the providers and our people, so they're not strangers. There's that level of comfort that develops.
Yep.
And two, the providers get a real firsthand look at some of what's going on out there and can provide suggestion and feedback and that type of stuff.
Chief, that's
so the
so
other thing
good.
to this.
That's so good. Sorry, go ahead.
Thanks. The other thing that I'm looking at is a fatigue management plan. And part of that is when you run as much as we do, actually in any EMS system, people are just getting hammered on calls.
Yeah.
So there needs to be built-in breaks on some days where people are allowed to come back and say, take the truck out of service, go eat a meal, go to the washroom, take care of yourself for an hour because you've just been getting hammered taking care of people for the last 8-10 hours. Take care of yourself for an hour. If I get to transfer a call to another agency to handle it, that's fine. I'm more worried about your well-being and stuff like that. So part of the fatigue management plan is that, as well as looking at ways that we can help people sleep better, both on the job and off the job. On the job is hard, but if we can come up with ways to help them sleep off the job, whether it's limiting overtime exposure or providing them with some type of services for sleeping at home, sound machines, meditation, whatever. So the final piece to all this, I said beginning to end, the final piece is as people are getting ready to rotate out, they'll meet a couple times with a provider where they talk about what it means to rotate out and that loss of self-identity and that transition to civilianhood and the impacts that have. You know, we don't want you to leave the job and then not know what you're doing and not have your friend group and lose that security and have you end up hurting yourself. So part of that is dealt with by preparing people to make that transition as they get ready to go out. So when I say we're going to be aggressive about this, that's where we're going to be. And we have a new city manager who is on board. She wants our people to be safe. She wants them to be as healthy as they can be. And really, this is one of the biggest things that we can do right now. And our intent would be, once we get something set up, would be to offer it to both our law enforcement, Bangor PD, and to our public health group, who sees a lot of people who are in transient states and are socioeconomically depressed. You know, they deal with a lot of compassion fatigue and other things, and we think that they could probably benefit from this as well. So we're going to get it rolling and then open the door and offer it to others, and hopefully it's beneficial to them as well.
Well, I can tell you, I just heard 100,000 cops' hearts drop when you said limit overtime exposure. But besides that, which I fully agree with, because there's dudes that I've known that have worked 36 hours straight because they need the overtime or whatever. You are speaking my language, and the way you outlined it, I appreciate you putting that out there. Mo, I'm sorry, I know you were itching. There's so much good stuff. It was great.
You know what I've noticed, having gotten involved in the mental health, establishing this hope line and working on that strategic planning committee, we are working with not only law enforcement officers, but fire. We're working with communications, detention, various other areas. But I have noticed that it seems like the fire department are so much more progressive when it comes to attacking the issue of mental health. They seem to have their programs. Like we have been sitting with them and they're like, oh, we've been running that program for X amount of years already, or we've been doing this for X amount of years. And I just think it is refreshing to hear again that you guys identified, oh my gosh, we had two of our people who have done something that is unthinkable, and we're going to immediately jump on it. You're not going to just wait till it just gets worse and worse and worse. So I just think that that part of it is incredible. And then the last caveat to say, then we're going to share it with the other public safety people, because once you've built it out and you've had that, you've jumped through all the hoops, why not share it?
Right.
That's one of the things that I think we are kind of battling with now, because I'm seeing these fire departments that have these very established mental health programs to help their guys and girls out, but they are hoarding a lot of their, like their clinicians that are competent clinicians that they're utilizing. They're saying, nope, they're ours, or things like that. So what a great way to kind of set your entire city up for success. I just think that that's amazing on that. Thing that a contributor to a lot of the mental health issues is the amount of calls for service that you're encountering. Do you think there's also, I've seen in the news, and I'm sure you've seen it because this is in your wheelhouse, where firefighters, that belovedness is being taken advantage of to an extent, like where you had the firefighters that were ambushed and things like that. Do you think that that is a contributing factor too, that's adding stress to your guys and
Sure.
gals?
Yeah. So I think a little bit. I know when you look at the continuum of stressors, and in a survey that we did in our own organization, when you look at the continuum of stressors,
Hmm.
it starts with call volume. And then somewhere in there, in like the first five is finance, and then leadership, and then holding people accountable, and then respect or recognition from either leadership or from the community or whatever the case may be. I think as to the point you're making, I think as we become more aware of it and we gain a more tactical situational awareness, that'll be a stressor to people as we go. And I mean, we all, like in my department, we have some TAC medics, and we all have bulletproof vests. We all have a body armor.
Right.
Um, um, but it really hasn't set in yet that this is an emerging risk that we're going to have to deal with. And we have our risk profile, without getting into specifics, our risk profile in Bangor makes me shiver because it's just huge. And the awareness just isn't there yet. I mean, we're trying to get there, but it's just not there yet. And you know that recency of occurrences is what really drives a lot of that. Until something happens,
Yeah.
or unfortunately happens two or three times, it's going to be difficult to get the message to set in. You would think, we talked about the incident in Lewiston, with the mass shooting in Lewiston.
Right.
You would think that that would have been a wake-up call across most of the metros in the state of Maine. It wasn't.
No.
It just wasn't.
Yeah.
So, like I say, as we become more tactically aware, that will definitely add to the stressors. Not only because of the situation, but because of all the preparatory things that we'll have to do in the change
Right.
in the way that we operate and all that other stuff. So,
Right.
I have nothing to add to how you phrase those. I just have two more questions. One is, in your career, what are some of the biggest challenges you've seen with either recruiting or new firefighters? You mentioned a few things: family, finances, call volume, things like that. Are you seeing, I'll just phrase it that way, what are some of the bigger challenges you're seeing with the new generation of firefighters?
yeah. So, we talk about challenges and not being able to communicate and all those things.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be honest with you, those are the same challenges that were there when I joined the fire service. They're the same challenges as before. Really, the challenge is not so much on the new people coming in as far as when they come in the door and how we deal with them. The challenge is on how we're managing them, how we're communicating with them.
From a
What type
leadership
of
side,
What's that?
from a leadership side, like
From the
how
leadership
you're,
side.
okay.
Yeah. So when you come through the door now as a new firefighter, I should be expecting that you are computer savvy, that you know how to research things, that you understand software systems and all that stuff. I should not expect you to know how to turn a screwdriver. I should not expect you to know how to start a chainsaw or raise a ladder or fix an engine. Those are all old skills. They're still relevant and pertinent skills.
I
But
see
those
what
are
you're
all
saying.
skills that kids really aren't learning. I say kids,
Yeah.
young
Yeah.
adults or whatever aren't learning anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the shift has to be to teaching them that stuff as they come in the door. So, for example, and I like to use this, if you look at the U.S. Marines or the Royal Marines over in the United Kingdom, when those recruits come through the door, they teach them everything. A Marine commando or a Marine will get in the shower and teach them how to shower, where to apply soap, how to rinse, how to
That's
shave, soup to
True.
nuts.
Yeah.
And that's kind of almost where we are. You know, not too long ago, we had a plugged toilet in the fire station. So the junior person takes care of the bathroom. That's just what you do.
it.
So
I
the
like it.
call was, hey, firefighter X, head to the downstairs bathroom. The toilet's plugged. Bring the plunger down. So the guy brings the plunger down and sets it by the toilet and leaves, not knowing that he had to plunge the toilet because nobody told him specifically. And he
I
wasn't being an idiot. He just didn't. He didn't know.
yeah.
Nobody told him specifically. And not only
Yeah.
that, but he didn't understand. He didn't necessarily know how to plunge a toilet. I mean, he kind of knew the mechanics of it, but he didn't
Yeah. Yeah.
fully understand the process behind it because he'd never been taught how to do it. So
Fair
we're
enough.
teaching people how to clean toilets now and clean bathrooms and stuff when they come in. Not because they're dumb people. They've just never really been shown. It's
Yeah.
not a life skill they learn. I have
Yeah.
to teach you how to do laundry in the fire station because your parents never taught you. We have bedding and other things that we need to wash. This is how you do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. Okay.
there's a lot of frustration because people come through the door and they don't know what to do. They don't know what they're doing. It's a struggle, those types of things. Well, they haven't been trained to do it.
Yeah.
If you set them up, if you ask them to do something they're comfortable in, they'll knock it out of the park. But
Right.
otherwise, we've got to go all the way back to the beginning and train people in what we want them to know and how we want them to do it. Because they just don't know. They're not bad people,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
going to ask questions. That's the only way you're going to learn is to ask questions. And because they are online based, and because the level of respect isn't there anymore, where if you mouth off, you get a hand across the back of your mouth, or you get the belt, or whatever the case may be,
Yeah. Yeah.
that behavior or that respect hasn't been set yet.
Right.
And that's another
Gotcha.
piece that we have to bring in. When they ask questions, it's not because they're being rude or they're trying to be a pain in the ass. It's because they legitimately want to know, they want to understand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you don't take the time to understand where the generation is coming from and what they need and what drives them, then you're going to default back to what you always had. And that's where a lot of that frustration and anger comes from. And that's why people don't want to stay. If you don't
Yeah.
know, you don't want to come in and get yelled at because you don't
Yeah.
understand something,
Yeah.
that type of thing.
It's very
That's
So,
a
interesting.
valid point. Yeah.
It's very
yeah,
interesting when you talk about the training aspect of it. And that goes back to where I think you have really dove into the leadership portion of it, because leadership has to be ever evolving because the individuals that you're leading are going to be constantly different. And I know as an instructor, I've been an instructor now since 2006, and the people that I was instructing in 2006 are very different than the people that are being instructed now. They do ask a lot more questions, and they ask questions sometimes that we as, you know, old school people will go, this guy's an idiot. But they aren't learning these life skills.
Right.
They don't know how to do the bare minimums. And whereas we are teaching them how to talk to people and going, why are these kids not knowing how to talk? You guys are teaching them how to, you know, fight fires and clean toilets. It's just very interesting. I think that firehouse aspect builds in a whole nother layer of training and teaching that comes along. And I think that this makes me kind of go off on another tangent a little bit. It also lends to going back to when you were talking about the mental health piece, having that firehouse home aspect lends to that mental health component being a little more easy to transition to. People live at the firehouse. So if I bring somebody to your home and I'm a friend of
Yeah.
yours, you're going to inherently trust them a little bit more than the individual that comes to comes to the headquarters, which is
yep.
what we go to. We don't live there. So down a rabbit hole a little bit on that one.
I teach with somebody who is a superintendent of the school system, is very big on, of course, education, of course, but
Yeah.
his statement to me has been, if you want to know what you're going to be dealing with coming up through the fire service, take a look at what the middle school kids are doing right now, the seventh and eighth graders, because that's the generation that you're going to be dealing with in a couple of years. That's where
Yeah.
a lot of this foundation is being laid. Look at what they're learning, look at how they're communicating and the things they're doing, and prepare your supervisors
For
for
that.
what they're doing, because
Yeah.
that's what's going to be coming in and they're going to be getting for leadership. or they're the ones that they're going to be leading.
Yeah.
So interesting. And my son is a Marine. I've talked about it a lot, and I can confirm what you just described is something that he was shocked and awed that they were doing that. And he goes, "Dad, a lot of people didn't know until they showed him." I was like, "Are you shitting me?" He's like, "No, for real." So you are 100% correct. Last part, and this is kind of tying into the mental health because you touched on it. And I wrote it down, but you said that you bring in the families and you talk to them about that. I find that amazing. I don't think I've only been in law enforcement. I've worked for 5 different agencies. That has never been a thing. And I can say early on, I didn't want to share and I didn't talk to my family or my kids about what I was going through, and I just dealt with it all alone. And so sorry, that's a statement. My question is, how long have you been doing that, and what benefits have you seen from that?
So we don't know the benefits yet.
Okay.
We're
So it's
just
still early.
we're just starting. So everything that we talked about is actually in its infancy. We're just
Okay.
rolling all of this out now. It's built off of other programs. It's things that have been effective in other places. I can tell you other fire departments that have done something like this have seen benefits in that while the member may not talk to the family about the calls or whatever, because it can be traumatizing for them,
Yeah.
the family has a heightened awareness of what's going on. So instead of we'll use a husband and wife combination, instead of the wife
Yep.
being upset because the husband seems distant or
Yeah.
he's not interested anymore, whatever the case may be, now there's that awareness that there might be something more underneath there that's more critical or potentially dangerous that I should call somebody. So those people have access to the peer support group too. So wife can call peer support and say, "Hey, just so you know, this is what I'm seeing in Joe. He's acting like this or whatever. Have you seen it? Is this something I should be worried about?" Or access to the clinicians, those types of things. So there's obviously some barriers there and some things that necessarily can't be talked about, but that
Yeah.
awareness piece is really, really important in sharing that awareness piece. Because if you can intervene early, not only does it protect the person downstream, but it also saves them a lot of trouble. We have what's called the Center of Excellence on the fire side, where you can go to. And normally it's a 30 to 45-day program. You're there to deal with your mental health issue. It's $3,500 a day to go to that program. So if we can catch people early and help them deal with these things early and leave that as a catastrophic or last resort thing to do, that's ideal. One,
Yeah.
because it's cheaper, but more importantly, it's less traumatic for the family and for the person because they're not leaving for a month or two where they're worried about what's going on and that type of stuff. I'll leave you one last mental health hint while we're finishing with mental health. One of the biggest ways that I got buy-in to start doing this stuff was after the second suicide that we had. I came out, we had a group meeting, and I came out during that meeting and shared that I had my own mental health issue that I had to deal with and I actually had to go away for. And it stemmed back to things that didn't involve the fire service, a lot of that familial stuff and other things that just built up over so many years. And I was willing to share that I went through that experience and a little bit about, some of the feelings that I had and the desperation that I had and how I finally sought help and how beneficial it was. And that really got, from what I'm told, that really got a lot of buy-in from the crews to have a leadership step up and say, "Hey, we understand this. Some of us have been through this. While we don't know what you're going through, we can at least relate to it and we're
Yeah.
supportive of it." It's not just theater. It's legitimate. What we're doing here is legitimate because we get it. So that got a lot of that from the feedback from the union and others that got a lot of buy-in to some of the processes that we're doing. We're still going to have the hiccups,
Of
but I
course.
think it eased us into some of what we're going to be talking about.
That was one of the things when we have done our mental health piece and what with me dealing with the, like I said, the strategic planning for that hope line for first responders. That is one of the things that we hear resounding, that there is a lot more buy-in and people are more willing to trust what is being offered to them when it comes from the top down. But very rarely do you see individuals that are in positions of power to be vulnerable. And if you get somebody and you're saying, hey, share with me, tell me what's going on with you, but they can feel that you have a wall up that you're not sharing, they are not going to. They are incredibly intuitive, even though they're in a critical state or a critical space. So first of all, thank you for sharing that part of it. But I think that absolutely is what the piece that is missing from most of our agencies, because from the top down, people aren't honest with how things affected them for a variety of reasons, but they are unwilling to put that kind of lay their heart out so that their people can see that this is where I'm coming from with making this available to you, instead of it feeling like you're just going through the motions and, well, checking this box off. I got to offer mental health because we had a suicide, so let me make sure I throw it out there to our guys.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel that way when you're honest and raw.
Right. Yep.
No, for sure. Well, Chief, we've been going for over an hour and a half, so I
Yes.
want to respect your time, sir.
Sure.
It goes by quick. And is there anything you want to leave with?
No, if we're talking about leadership, I think the one thing that I would lead with is leadership is dangerous. It's just dangerous. And you kind of alluded to it there as far as putting yourself out there and being vulnerable. You have to be vulnerable. And leadership is about taking risks, and risk is dangerous. So if you're going to lead and you're going to lead effectively, you've got to understand that. And the danger not only comes from your boss, but it also comes from how people might perceive you or things people may say about you. And if that is an overriding fear that you have, then you're really going to have a lot of challenges. And I would encourage people to find ways that they can take risks simply and build into it. I took an improv class, and I'm an introvert, but I took an improv class just because I wanted to see what it was like. Huge risk for me. I don't necessarily like being around people in that type of environment, but so little things like that. They don't necessarily have to be job related, but just little things to help you build up some resiliency to taking that risk. The gains or the benefit from that will be huge as people progress through their career and look to become leaders or better leaders.
Chief, well said. I appreciate you.
Yeah, for sure.